Who
Hi there, Warren.
do we have here?
We lost Miller because he was patiently waiting for you, but then we just discussed everything. It's all done, so now he's gone. He's going to come back later. That's what he said.
Excellent. Good. Well, I'm glad we're done because that will make it easier.
Yeah. Can I recap that what we discussed? Probably two topics with Miller.
Please.
Yeah, thank you.
Afternoon.
That one topic was that, so which ISO 20 or 22 to adopt, because there's SEPA Instant, there is the UK one, then there is the, UK is ISO 80 something based, am I right? The instant, and then there's I'm aware of obviously the Hungarian instant payment, which is modeled on SEPA, and I know quite well, being part of the Singaporean implementation, the fast way of using the same PAX messages. And another part of the discussion was that, yeah, it's not paying what we need to, so not the payment initiation, but the payment clearing and settlement, so the PAX messages, 008 and 002, and the related ones to adopt. And there was one more part of the quick chat, that should we have this as part of Moja Loop or as the cross-network functionality, and probably depends on the situation. So if cross-country and switching across networks, then it's a cross-network capability, but also make Moja Loop that other DFSPs could utilize the ISO messages to communicate with our systems and do some adaptation somewhere. Okay, that's all what we discussed.
Great. Thank you for the summary. So I think, was everybody else here for that bit already? Sorry, I thought the time was past, which is why. So, and then I had some technical problems. But I think starting with the last point first, for my money, the cross-network operation is separate, because going to your first point, actually the real issue is that there are so many versions of ISO 20022 messages. You know, there are different flavors of that,
yeah.
and therefore, you know, we know that's, you know, Swift talks of the harmonization of ISO 20022 because, of course, they care deeply about the divergence. So, so I think that's really, it does speak to the heart of the challenge, right? By us, so which standard do we want to adopt, and which standard do we want to? How do we want to affect the standard in Moja Loop? So, for instance, we could obviously go to the ISO committee and present our own messages. You know, we don't have to stick to pane or PAX, so we can literally have our own, especially for the quotes. This has been spoken about in a number of forums.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But one of the benefits of doing ISO in a semi-standard way is, of course, that all the tools that are already set up for it, all the other elements in the ecosystem which are supportive of it. I think you know, Justice was mentioning yesterday in his assessment of fraud tools, that's a lot of native support for them. So it's those kind of elements which are very powerful in driving it. Yeah. So so thoughts from me.
Sorry.
No, please share this.
Yeah, there was one more comment from Miller which might be relevant, that he was suggesting that the SEPA instant might change in the future. There are issues with it. But the Singaporean one, the fast payment that MAS is standing behind, that there are community members who are also familiar with that one, and that is more likely to be relevant for our purpose, being in that region and so on and so on. But yeah, probably he is better if he's explained this, but that was also kind of a side note previously.
Yeah. Yeah, so MFS, I think BankServe, in the BankServe solution, they have what they're calling ISO Lite, which is a drop-down one. I think, Donovan, you guys are using that, aren't you? Or
yeah, so so I think Max can probably speak more to that because he's been investigating the message formats.
Okay, yeah, look, I have been looking at that. I'm actually busy working on the spec anyway to connect to BankServe. Well, they call it TCIB. And yes, it is the Lite. It does use, I've just checked, it uses the PAX 004, 008 XML. Yeah, as you said, it doesn't involve any quoting at all. We've been in contact with them about this. And they say, no, well, they don't impose the way fees must be applied. So we are going to try and make some assumptions, build a quote engine into it on our side as part of the adapter. And yeah, but theirs is a very simple, here's the request, can you transfer? Yes, no. If you say yes, it's transferred. If it's not transferred, if you say no, it's not transferred. It's a very simple request response message, which does cover basically everything we do need for a P2P transfer. We're only looking at P2P transfers at the moment for that. And yes, it does, as I said, covers everything we need except for any way of doing a quote or what the fees are going to be on the other side.
Yeah.
So for the initial bit, we will actually make some assumptions, document those assumptions, and then just see how it goes. I think, Don, when we're hoping to get this POC done, when do you reckon? If not for the convening end of the year, probably the first one next year. We do hope to have a POC running with them on that.
Yeah, I think like hopefully the next convening, if we can all go smoothly. So Max, the other thing was also not only the quoting side on the TCIB side, but also the discovery part.
Yeah, there is no discovery. Yes, Don's quite right. There is no discovery at the moment as to who the other people are. We will say, right, we will have to come up with a way to say this is a TCIB message. We will switch it out to them, and they will then discover who it must go to on their side. They are looking at putting some discovery messages in, but that is still under discussion from their side and is not implemented yet, or there is no firm plans as to when to implement it. Hope that clears anything up.
So all right. So this is the point about having an appreciation for our level 1 desires and objectives around discoverability, being able to have an agreement between people before they transact, and then to actually initiate a transaction, right? So I think what we're saying is we on the one hand we have so the work that you guys are doing is really focused on that cross-network experience, right? How do we deal with the fact that it goes in, has to be, we have to talk merge loop on one side and ISO Lite on the other with BankServe, but so that's a cross-network experience.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that in those cases, it's really good to understand what's happening there. that's slightly different to what we want to do, though. At the core, we want to say we actually want to be working in an ISO native mode. So what would it take to have us be compliant with ISO message, but still have the goodness of the goodness of merge loop and the level 1 line principles baked into that? So these things are not mutually exclusive, though, and I think we learn from both angles and dimensions, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's, in terms of the our kind of milestones or or high level objectives which we want to do, and so I'm having a little trouble with our Miro board today. So I think what we're saying is that which standard version of ISO do we want to adopt? And to do that, we actually need to do a bit of a comparison of what's available to understand if there is something that is totally available at the moment, or if we want to be able to how complete a solution that gets us, and what would the impact be if we did decide to extend it for that agreement phase, for those quotes that as you said, Max, nothing else has, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, that is part of the problem going cross network. No two networks, and I've found this in the payment systems quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
No two payment systems are going to have the same set of business rules, and quite often, even in this country, South Africa, I know people are joining from all over the world. Quite often, you will send a card transaction to a certain bank thinking they're going to authorize it, but they don't. They will send it on to another bank for authorization. It just so happens that they are the link into that other organization.
Yeah.
And this is going to be the same case here.
So, John, you're going to leave the room open for the next 2 hours?
Oh, yeah. So
I'm just turning my other PC down.
Yeah.
I've got both sessions up. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So I'm going to start adding some things onto the board here. So I'm going to say which ISO standard we want to do. I'm going to list SEPA, UK Foster Payments, and ISO Lite. Are those the three main ones we're thinking of?
And I think a big decision as well is what are we actually going to use the 20224 for, sort of the online transactions, payments, whatever. So I think that also affects it quite a bit. Like I know Renjef has been working on it as well for the settlement side, for doing settlement of file, settlement and moving files across.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we've definitely been doing that in other work as well, where we have to run settlement instructions through RTGSs and other elements like that. You invariably will encounter some which require an ISO 20022.
Yeah.
So we need to do these kind of scoping elements to it, right?
It's a lot of work either way.
For some reason, I cannot type in. Well, I'm having trouble actually typing in Muriel.
Warren, is there a new Miro board for PI11? Or?
Yes, there is. Yeah, let me give you a link to it.
Thanks.
Although it's not really helping me to access it right now, but I think I'm having a... Does that work for you?
Yeah, it works for me.
Okay, I'm getting type something, but I'm not getting... So I can only draw pretty pictures, apparently. Don't know if you can see. Donovan, can you add things?
Yeah. Okay, cool.
You can. You can type. I can't type.
Oh, crap, I think I just deleted someone's. Oh well. Where's the erase button? Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Okay. So I think what we've been saying there, what I was trying to add was actually some post-it notes to say, to capture these concepts around, you know, we need to decide on the scope for us to actually meet that milestone of making a decision of which standard to adopt or what recommendations to make. We need to do that deeper analysis. Now, I know some of us have done an analysis. I know the guys at Motorsbox, Michael Richards, has done an analysis on how to do this. But so my question for you guys is this: that would it be worth doing a POC to see how far we can get at the moment with ISO compliance? And what does it look like when we have something for if we have an understanding about what it's going to take to actually do it just with the current ISO message dictionary. Oh, you got to click at a keyboard though. Do we have any thoughts on that?
So I do think it is good to do the POC. Like as Max said, like we've been doing some investigating and we've already seen that, you know, we do need the quoting and the discovery phase because those are the things that come from the level 1 principles. And then that like also asks the question is like, how far do we extend those level 1 principles? Do we say that goes up to the boundary of module loop, or do we also want to extend those to any system that module loop interoperates with? If we do say that is the case, then, you know, then we need things like a separate quoting engine to support that.
Yeah, look, I think personally, you will never get it beyond the borders of module loop. It's like I live here in South Africa. I'm governed by the laws here in South Africa. If I decide to go to the UK or US or wherever, I've got to abide by their laws. The moment I leave South Africa, I'm governed by someone else's laws. And I think it's going to be the same here. I think you will never get agreement for someone else to abide by your rules. Unfortunately, I think that's just the way the world is.
Yeah. So I think we have to expect that we have to live. Michael put it well in his conversation around the cross network. It's going to be a heterogeneous environment. You know, we're not going to have a standard way of dealing with things that meets all the time. So I think to your point, Donovan, in particular, I think it would be fair to say that anything that goes across the system boundaries has to be based on the scheme rules, right? So the way MasterCard, Visa, Swift do this now is that they say, when you sign up to be a participant in our system, the way you interact with it, the way you're going to behave is governed by the rules you are signing here. And of course, those rules are subject to the national jurisdictions that you're under. But as a participant in this system, you're going to behave in a particular way towards other participants in the system. But when it comes to being that cross-network provider, it's got to be that you will meet some kind of SLA on doing a transfer effectively, but it's also not the same as being modular loop, right? But it is possible. I mean, we know this because there are other level 1 aligned programs around the world. Pakistan's a good example where they're doing their own total home-baked solution for a level 1 aligned payment switch, which has got nothing to do with what we're doing. But it is compatible and is definitely that level 1 solution. So in those cases, we'd like to think that you could impedance match extremely well. But yeah, so again, for us, the kind of things that I think matter, what would you guys say are the things in the technology layer that help us enforce the level 1 principles?
For the level 1 principles, do I understand right that the quote capability is the missing piece that none of the ISO, or at least what I'm aware of, none of the ISO 20 or 22s doing?
Correct. It's certainly one of the biggest missing pieces.
Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, on the non-revocability and all the other things, that's fine. And the non-repudiation and the security and whatever, that is handled by the protocols themselves, not the messages itself. That is true, different from the modular protocol.
Yeah. So I suppose there's so for non-reputability, and I think Miller described this really well when he highlighted that the two components around the interledger protocol and the JWS signing, it's the combination of those two things which bake in, overlaid on top of the fact that we have the quote phase as well as the transfer phase, that allow us to deliver on the level 1 principles. So I think and that's why the conversation always goes to, well, there's no quote directly in the system, and therefore we need to consider whether or not we want to introduce into the wider community. Because if we do that, we start to change the way other ISO 20022 platforms will operate. We'll start to be able to change the way that the analytics happen against ISO 22 systems. And that is really the part of the benefit of us going down this road, is that we will meet the current ecosystem at the right place and allow them to start seeing some of the benefits that we see from these solutions. But I suspect we're all talking to the converted, yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I've always said I love about standards is everyone implements it differently.
Correct. Correct. So, so I think I'm trying to go through a document here. Okay, I need to get this document published and shared with the community. So, as I said, we've actually done a bit of a work through of what it would take to do a proof of concept here and how we could map parameters onto the ISO messages and how we could use them in the discovery phases. Businesses could request messages, and I can't see what he's done. But I think one of the other sticking things that we should be trying to identify quite soon is there are people and are JSON versions of ISO 20022 that have been shared. Do we know which one of those is, if we were to do a POC, which one would we choose? Is there a front runner for something on the standardization process? I think we need to do, what we should do as part of our POC is discover one of those, because we shouldn't try and reinvent all the wheels that we don't have to, right? Like I said, a core principle here is really, we want it to be as compatible as possible with this broader brush, because ultimately, as Max keeps reminding us, each standard will be broken by its implementers in some way. But for us to get maximum benefit and promote interoperability, it makes sense for us to try and go for a vanilla definition of the that we're working with.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I agree. If we can go for vanilla, it's wonderful. But what would be nice to find out if there is anyone out there who has actually implemented a vanilla, and there will be. Not everyone tries to come up with their own standard based on someone else's standard. And try and work with someone who has implemented a vanilla, because to try and do a POC that everything is in your own mind is very hard to do when you don't actually know what you're working towards. So often it's a lot easier to do a POC if you're working with someone on the other side and actually have some use cases, what you are actually trying to do. So I think that's the main thing, get use cases.
yeah. So
are we targeting only the fund transfer, or do we want to do more?
I think we want to do more.
Mm-hmm.
I think we discussed early on, we should capture a note on that, it's not just the transfers, but it's actually the transfers and, we actually need to, on this board, we should think of it in terms of actually doing all the stages. So it's the discovery, the agreement, the transfer, and the settlement messages. Because all of those things are necessary to do a full end-to-end functionality.
Mm-hmm. Do we want also request to pay, because it also has the corresponding ISO message?
Yes.
I don't remember by heart, but I do have the implementation actually. So we could do that.
Yeah.
I think going back to the point made earlier about the use cases, in the board, should the first step be to then identify those use cases before we delve into the specifics of which ISO formats we compare? Because we can do it either way, right? Either we can do a global comparison of all the formats and identify what we need, or we can drive it through focus on the top use cases that we want support.
Hi, Warren. Guys, it's Ranjit here. Sorry, I was on mute all the while. I had another call, but I think I agreed to Shankar's as well, because ISO 222 has got a lot of different variants and a lot of different iterations as well. We've been working on a couple of integrations recently, so identifying the use cases would be a first priority. If it's just transfers, there's other credit push transfers, different messaging formats, even for ISO. Sorry that I'm so late, but I just thought I'd just add to this on top of that one.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I agree. We should be clear on what we're trying to do, and in the selection or consideration of which standard, we definitely want to have considered the core set of use cases. The POC itself obviously may be a subset of that again. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, definitely getting a POC going once we have identified the use cases. Absolutely. Yeah.
Warren, one question that I'm trying to formulate that, so this POC is going to be an extra module in Moduloop. So we're gonna have like an ISO adapter module implemented in Node.js, or this is going to be a standalone POC, or how should we visualize, or at least for me, it's an interesting question, that how should I imagine how this POC going to be?
That's actually a good point as well. One of my experiences based on working with ISO 222 for the past 3-4 months. We do see there's actually real-time transactions that gets processed on a real-time basis, and then there's also the file transfer mechanism where they use file in order to read the file and then send it to destination also. Right. So, for example, like Swift, there are still banks in Africa that uses this technology, and so that's also something that we want to look into how we can tackle that. Maybe look into doing a real-time conversion from ISO 8583 to 222, or looking into a file transfer mechanism where you get a PAIN 001 format file, you read the file, you convert it into a 222, send it through a destination. That's a different combination of many different variables.
Yeah, I would say that based on the discussion, Miller, who was here before, so it's more getting a real-time payment and probably probably following the Singaporean fast way of using the ISO 222 messages for only the real-time payment scenarios. I'm not sure that we do, especially in a POC, want to start with bulk payment.
I agree.
And for the real-time ones, if we say that, okay, follow the Singaporean one, that it's straightforward. Some documentation is available on MAS website, and I do have my own set of documentation working on that one previously. So we could clearly identify that which fields are relevant and which messages are relevant and what's the exact message flow. And here, so we could do that as an adapter in Moduloop or as an external component which transforms the Moduloop and the ISO messages, and that's a POC that probably can be done in a 3 months time frame.
Yeah,
they have an adaptation, and if I initiate a payment from let's say a fast participant in Singapore, then it goes to this intermediary adapter and it becomes a payment to one of the participants in the Moduloop network. And then vice versa. We could initiate another payment from a Moduloop DFSP and it should arrive to a fast participant virtual bank.
Sounds like it's nice. So I can also help with this Raw Bank, BCDC, and the Equity Bank in Africa, because we're actually doing a simulation testing for them. So I've got the formats for those banks as well. So we can look into doing a mapping between, and these all 3 different variations of ISO 222. Like this one said, we can look into doing a transaction from Moduloop entity onto an adapter. We have an ISO 20022 adapter kind of scenario, like we did for the LPS adapter, and then converting it onto OpenAPI or vice versa, and then doing a real-time transaction. Max, you were saying something. Sorry, I just something.
Yeah, look, that's basically what Renjak, Don, and I are working on already through Coil, is basically a POC from Mojo Loop using an adapter, same as we did for the LPS. So you don't actually affect the central Mojo Loop system. That is in effect what we are trying to do right now. A small contained POC for P2P transfer, both outgoing from Mojo Loop and incoming to Mojo Loop.
Yeah. Which is great, but not the same as. So I think Isfan, what we were saying then, and just actually, the way we do the adaption has to be slightly different. It's not sufficient to just adapt it at the edges, because we want we still want to have the signing, we still want to have the ILP, we still want to have all these other things. So it actually means we will have to transfer the message through the actual system. But again, I don't think that's particularly onerous. And I think that mapping out to us extracting the actual data content from something which is an ISO message rather than a FSP IOP message is not going to be a big piece of work either. So I think it's, we just need to agree how we're going to interpret those elements. But the main things we need from an ISO point of view is actually really very, very small. From a Mojo Loop point of view is very small. The question is how the DFSPs respond to it.
So for a DFS point of view, I could send in the existing REST APIs, or I could send on a different endpoint an ISO PAX 008 message, and I got kind of the same treatment. My money going to be transferred to another DFSP.
It's mostly ISO 220 makes use of a URL and an endpoint, and then you have some endpoint listening to the message. You can do the conversion and send it to.
Wait, Ranjit, you are hardly can be heard. You come closer to the microphone.
No, sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, better now.
I was saying the ones that we've been doing, it's basically listening on and sent through URLs. So you actually have an endpoint on the adapter or wherever it is, and then you send the transaction, you perform the translation onto the next protocol. That's what we were looking into doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually easy to do as a POC in 3 months' time as well, Warren.
Sorry, Ranjit, I didn't hear your last point.
What I was saying is the integrations that we've been doing for the banks here in Africa. So we are making use of a URL and an endpoint, because ISO 222 seems to be using URLs for real-time transaction processing as well. And previously for our adapters, we were looking at using TCP/IP sockets for connection, but now with the URLs, we can actually create an endpoint on the adapter, receive the transaction, convert to the next protocol, and send it through to the DFSP based on what our conversion needs to happen. That's what I was trying to say.
And an interesting question: that do you want to use WS signing, so it's encrypt or sign the messages standard, or you want to do it somehow in a header out of the message, or how you want to ensure the security aspects of it?
That one we haven't done that participant. So if something has happened, so we have to do that. Look into differently.
I mean, we had one implementation, like in Hungary, they adopted a strange approach that signed the whole message, is converted to basic and signed the whole thingy and put into a PKCS11 envelope. That's really a disaster. But then other countries adopted things. They sign the messages as an XML message and put it as a WS signed message, a web service kind of way.
Okay,
but again,
so
it's out of the POC.
Yeah, it's going to be out of the possible. Yeah.
Well, I think what we've got to do with the POC is make sure we don't degrade the service. So make sure we're doing it at least as good as we have right now. And I don't think that's a million miles away. So we have various components in the community for doing JWS signing, for doing ILP, for doing all these things. So those things we can do, but we need to make, I suppose we need to make a decision in the POC for just well, what am I saying? My vote would be, rather than POC everything badly, we POC a little bit of it really well. That makes sense. So, for instance, we might just do transfers as opposed to request to pay, but do that really well. So with the full non-reputability, idempotency, all the kind of characteristics that we expect to have. ILP, where we have certified the transfer request has been aligned.
So, Warren, I agree with you there. We should just focus on perhaps P2P transfers, but also the one thing I was thinking, if we do that really well, then we not split this into two, saying, for example, if you don't change anything on the ISO 222 side, say, for example, they don't have the quoting part, right? Then we can say the POC shows that these are the only use cases you support. However, if we suggest, as on the one card you said there, these additional messages, then this is the flow that you could enable, and that's how it would work.
Yeah. So there's a POC using existing messages. If we were to think about that as one stream, right? What would be the items we would want to do? We'd need to why whenever I put a post-it down, does it try and do a pin thing for me?
Why don't you tell me what you want to write in here, and I'll just type it.
I'm amazed. What I wanted to do is say, if we did a POC, so just using existing messages, what would we have to do? We would have to select the JSON form of ISO 20022, right? Our next task would be to map any parameters in our message stack onto the ISO messages, so we understand how we're going to work with them.
So it doesn't matter if you use a Visa card or Ask card or Amex card.
We're going to map. I can hear the rest of your team in the background there.
Oh, sorry.
So we're going to map over the ILP, and we're going to have to map over the use of JWS, so we can maintain our non-reputability and our accountability for the transfers that we can verify at the center.
Maybe one step before that is to, for that particular use case, define the flow. And even so, the point I'm trying to make is that for modular, we can ask for like a send amount or a receive amount, and those sort of affect the quoting stuff. So sorry, I was going to tell the guys to keep quiet.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with Don as well, because ISO doesn't really have a quoting mechanism, so you probably want to reflect that also into the POC and how.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for example, like if you just say you have a message coming from the 222 side into module loop and you say it's a send amount, then the ILP stuff and the condition and fulfillment sort of stays within the module loop side. But if you say it's a receive amount, then we need extra infrastructure or something else to facilitate that. So there's like a sort of a split there for me.
Yeah. So I think there's what we're trying to do here is kind of come up with what would be the scheme rules that would be applicable if we worked in this mode. Because where there would be discrepancies, we would have to say your scheme rule would have to define that, hey, if you send a request like this, it gets dealt with in this way by convention. So does that make sense? That where we're choosing to say, well, it's the same message structure, but we're going to process it differently, or our behavior is going to be different. Then we can cover it by scheme rules rather than technology. But we will know the gap then. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. I agree to that.
So by scheme, do you mean the module loop operators scheme, or
correct?
The other. Okay. What about the other end to which we are sending these messages to? So there may be some rules.
No, I'm not. I don't want us to talk in this POC about how it sends to a different network. I want to say DFSP to DFSP, right? So if we just focus on that for a bit, because I think that's
a bigger problem.
Well, yeah, it's a different problem. So if we say if DFSP A and B are signed up to a module loop scheme, but in that scheme they are using ISO 20022 rules, what does that look like to them? Okay. And there's a versioning problem, yeah, because what happens if the one's using that and the other's using FSP IOP?
That was my other question too. Yeah, go for it.
I think that a lot of that then comes into how do we implement all these different schemes, because at the moment we're talking, 20022. Now, next convening, we might be talking another one. We actually have a very good API already decided, which is what the DFSPs are talking. Everyone who's implementing it at the moment is using that API. If we want to talk to anyone else who is not prepared to, cannot implement that API for whatever reason, we need to have an adapter of sorts sitting that will do the adaption.
But it's about who.
One format to another.
Yeah. So, I mean, that happens everywhere all the time, right? So, yeah. So I mean, that's what, the payment hub and payment manager and all these other things do, or the SDK, right? All of these things are components which allow you to go from whatever your central banking solution is, your banking system does, your core banking system to whatever system we're talking to. So we're always doing that translation. The problem is the security and ownership of it. For it to be non-reputable, it's got to be something that's owned by that DFSP, right?
Right.
And they've got to be the ones signing it. I heard this guy saying a few days ago something about HSM's being really important in the banking world because they care about that stuff. So it's where the security boundary lies.
So yeah.
But so that translation happens in their domain to whatever other thing. What we can't have is a thing where the switch. So if you do the thought experiment, the switch, I get a message and it's FSPIOP, and I want to talk to another network that is Swift, and it's ISO 20022, right? So now that message comes through, either as a hub operator or as a third party, there's somebody playing the role of cross-network provider.
Yes.
Okay? But in playing that role, you are taking you're making a commitment to the system, to the scheme, that you're going to fulfill a transaction. Okay?
Yeah.
So as cross-network provider, I'm going to make this work for you. Don't worry, trust me. So that's why you sign it, you send the message back, you deal with it, and to the sender, it looks like the same thing. Now, if that thing is the switch doing it, the moment the switch plays that role of cross-network provider, so that would be the doing the translation business, right? And it means that the switch itself would take the liability for the transfers happening. And one of the really clever things about the way Mojo Loop's established is the switch doesn't take a position. The switch is not liable for the transactions. The switch is never integral to the transaction. It's never a financial participant, but it's also not a liable. You know, if the switch exploded in the middle, boom, gone, all its records gone. Payer A and payee B could look at their records and say, well, I've got my ILP packet. I've got the condition and the fulfillment, and you've got the condition of the fulfillment. You know, we're on. Which is part of the beauty of it. So the mode, that mode is something that, you know, fits the work you're doing at the moment. And I can totally see it happening, that there will be people that will do that, and there'll be switches that operate and provide that cross-network functionality within the center. But logically, we just keep them separate, and then kind of so that there's never a dependency that you, as a switch, as a hub operator, you have to provide cross-network functionality. It can always be done by a third party, so that the segregation of concerns is correct. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes, and I would agree with it. Gets down to who is actually driving. In my mind, I could be wrong, but in my mind, it is whoever is driving the cross-network connectivity is the one who should probably do the adaptation one format to the other. And therefore, they must make sure that everything is in place. And if it's not, they are going to take the risk. In this case, we are the ones trying to drive ISO 20, or let's just call it 22. It's a lot easier to say when it's just us. We're the ones trying to drive ISO 22 to connect to other switches. Therefore, we should be the one who will convert from the Mojo Loop API into the ISO 22 API. If it was, let's just take the one we're doing as Coil. We have approached TCIB to say we would like to do this, and TCIB has said, fine, you can connect to us. Here's our standard. Adhere to it. By the same token, if TCIB had decided, hey, we really think that Mojo Loop's got connections to all these people out there that we don't, we want to connect to them, we would have said to them, Here's our API. This is how we work. Connect to us. And they would have to do all the work. So I think a lot, when you start talking cross-network communications, it really comes down to who is actually wanting that more. Are you wanting it equally? And really, whoever wants it will end up driving it and doing most of the work, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. You're going to get very few networks to say, hey, we're Mojaloop, we want to connect to you. Please write a Mojaloop interface so we can connect you in our format and at your cost. Most switchers would say, well, no, you want to connect to us. This is our standard. And I think that's the way, I think you, Warren, earlier used MasterCard and Visa as the example. I doubt whether if you wanted to connect to Visa and you're already working with MasterCard, you say, Visa, I want to connect to you, but this is the standard I use to talk to MasterCard. I'm going to use this to talk to you. Visa would say, no, you want to connect to us, therefore this is our standard. So I think a lot of it is going to come down to who is driving the cross-network connection as to who does what. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's what's the commercial driver for it and who's going to get the benefit from it. It's those people that are going to be keen to do it.
Yes.
And I think it's.
Look, let's face it. Most of us here are techies. Technically, of course, it's possible. Anything can be done technically. It's more if the business is driving it and who's going to pay for it.
So I think that's a decision that sort of will filter down into the technical implementation. So if you say like you want to protect that person that's playing the cross-network or adapter role, then that might have an implication on the message flows. Like when do you give acknowledgements in both systems?
I think if we decouple the adapter in such a way that it can be at the edge at the DFSP or within the loop, and then provide for it in terms of transactions accordingly, then to address the commercial point that Max raised, if there's a question of also doing the right thing, right? And we need to protect the information flowing back and forth and the non-repeatability, etc. So if we implement the adapter in such a way that it can be transplanted back into a DFSP if need be, or we take on the responsibility, that way we'll have the flexibility in the future. Does it make sense?
So what you're saying, what I'm hearing I say here is a scary thought I've had before, which is actually it's not about ISO 20022 at all. It's about being able to flexibly. What's the pattern we're going to use to support any message?
That's my point.
Sorry, carry on.
That's exactly the point, right? That's a much wider question. ISO 20022 being an example, so tomorrow it can be something else.
Yeah, look, in some ways we have already done this with ISO 8583. We have connected to ISO 8583 switches in the real world, not in production, just as POCs. And yeah, we are making sure that everyone is protected. Luckily, because we could do both sides, we could do the whole quoting process all the way through to the end user at the device on the other side to make sure to quote. By the same token, Mojaloop relies quite heavily to ensure the integrity of the messages by signing that message with JWS. A lot of your switches out there won't handle it. If we happen to take, so let's just take your traditional payment switch. They don't know anything about signing under JWS or anything. What they understand is a MAC, message authentication key. So we can, in the adapter, decrypt the signing, if necessary, and take those same fields, whatever we're doing, and create a MAC. So when it gets to the other side can be assured that nothing was interfered with, and that message is still, the integrity of that message has not been affected. Now, because we were the ones driving that, we can take that responsibility on ourselves. If it was the payment switch who was doing it, they could change their system to create a signature. So it all gets back to whoever wants it must ensure the integrity of the message. And I don't think we should be playing around at all with the Mojo Loop API. I'm doing exactly the same thing with the cryptographic processing module. Yes, unfortunately, there are going to have to be some minor changes to the Mojo Loop system, but not to the API at all. That API is there, it works. It's probably going to have its quirks as we get on and probably have to be altered for whatever reason. But anything we do that needs to connect to Mojo Loop for whatever reason should not affect the heart of the Mojo Loop system. It must be done on the peripherals around it, and preferably, by the person who's driving it.
So,
and I've stunned
so
everybody.
Max, you describe a model of the world, which I recognize and like for lots of reasons, but I don't think it's possible, or should be what we constrain ourselves to. So, why do I say that? What you've said is you do everything at the edges that needs translation-y bits to it. And for instance, any other message information you wanted to pass or whatever, it's easy because you could pass it through, say, on the extension lists that we have on everything now.
Yeah.
Except those extension lists are limited, by the way. You can only have 32 of them, and they 16 bytes long, and there's a few other big gotchas. So it's almost useless. But to actually have made them more would have made the whole a farce of the whole protocol.
Yeah.
But the heart of Mojo Loop, I think, are the words you used. What is the heart of Mojo Loop? And I think we as a community should step back and reflect a little bit on that at the moment, because it's actually about the patterns and all the stuff, all the proliferary components of that message, which are at the heart of Mojo Loop, rather than the actual API definition itself, I would argue. They're things in there which we like, and some things we definitely don't like, even at this early time of having explored it. So we're learning quickly as we start having new things come on board. But I think having that clear understanding of what is the heart of Mojo Loop, what is the thing that's precious to us here, and what is the thing we need to protect over all the other stuff that we shouldn't care too much about. And I say that as a man who's often had the problem of being too closely associated, with you fall in love with your own creations, and then you think they're brilliant, right? So we want to try and not be overly precious about the things we shouldn't be, but really care about the things that are important. So I'm just getting a ping here to remind everyone that we wanted to have a brief pause at this point, so that if anybody wanted to change rooms and discussions, and also that we must probably running out of time and need to make sure we get stuff onto that board properly.
So just to quickly sum up, isn't this the reason why we said like first have a POC using existing messages, and then later on maybe some other form of the POC where we consider like what recommendations we need to make to ensure certain modular principles are adhered to?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we want to use that to really understand the things we care about or don't care about. And if we try and remain generic and conformant in that way, in that first POC, that should give us the insight we need to say, well, actually, this stuff, yeah, we really don't like. And this stuff, yeah, we really do like. Let's fight for it. Or we might discover that actually it all works out, and we've been able to repurpose the messages. So that I think there's, all right. I don't know if there's any people that have changed. I don't see anyone. I think we were all here before.
I did see one or two people jump in, then sort of heard what we were talking about and quickly ran away.
Oh, is that exciting, was it?
No, that's scary.
Not for the faint-hearted.
No. I don't know why I'm still in this industry.
Improving the world was never easy.
Yeah. So I think we, so we need to get this, I think, on our board, yeah, that we can actually say, oh, and I think Donovan's busy getting it on our board. I can see some action happening, yeah. So we want to get the, Donovan, do you want to take us through what you've got up there at the moment, and then we can just see how we can get a...
I don't know how much you
Sure.
pay for it.
Okay, so...
And what's the dolphin simulator?
I don't know. I think that sort of people ran out of space somewhere else and then dumped it on our
Okay.
board.
Dump it somewhere else.
We can sneak it up into the performance guys once without
I don't know, we could always ask someone what the purpose is of the dolphin simulator.
Okay, Max. Okay. You're gonna win the pun of the afternoon award.
Okay. So I think from my recollection is that we first said we're going to discuss the scope of which use cases we want to do, and I think the decision from that is that we're going to focus on one, possibly P2P first, and then I'm not sure if we should record that yet.
Yeah, we should.
And then also, okay, maybe just put it in brackets. P2P focus first, right? And then alongside that, we will do a comparison of the different concretions of the 222 spec. I think at some point we do need to say for the POC we are going to choose one. At the moment, Max, Renjith, and us are using the ISO Lite one. Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah. So can I suggest, if you're using the ISO Lite for the cross-network test, for this, which I've called it the ISO Adaption, but because I want this to be the one where we pass things through. And do we agree amongst ourselves that there are two modes, yeah? There are two modalities of using ISO. There's a cross-network mode, and then there's the native support for ISO.
Yes, absolutely. And they've different purposes, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we should use, if you guys are using the Lite for the cross-network, the POC that we do for the native support should be using a different one, just on the grounds of more data points.
It also avoids duplication of work.
Yeah. I mean, it could accelerate things if we, because you guys will have stuff already done and we could just use that and reuse it. So, but I think actually the more data points is more valuable.
Okay. So then from there, we said we're going to do a POC just using the existing messages first. As you can see there, like there's a whole bunch of things we need to investigate, such as message mapping, defining the flows. And I think there was a particular discussion about identifying the scheme rules. And I'm assuming that's from like the module loop side that would apply for that use case. And then also the risk and benefits for the entity fulfilling the adapt or cross network role.
Okay, so so that one would go into the cross network stream. So we maybe can have, should we have another blue box for the cross network POC, because we've been discussing it. Well, so we can put the elements of it. But I think the scheme rules, so we would want to understand in the native support POC, we would want to say, you could use it using the standard messages. This is how it looks. This is the flows. This is the message structure. This is it. But the scheme rules would have to have these caveats to them. There would be these conditions that you'd be signing up to if you were doing it this way. Because
Warren, would you mind just for my sake, just running through the native support part again?
So what we're saying is that we have two modes, two ways we're considering ISO 20022. The one is the cross-network POC. That's the stuff you guys are doing right now. And there is another one which is native support for ISO 20022. So in other words, that is ISO 2002 messages arrive at the module loop front door and go through the system that way.
Okay.
And yeah, and so I mean, just to remind us of also, I may have said this in the beginning, but just so everyone does understand, the reason why I put this as World Bank initiatives, the World Bank's convinced the US Fed to use ISO 20022 and use a modern standard. They hadn't told them about JSON or anything. But having done that, the World Bank is insisting all their projects around the world meet those standards. So any government, any national payment solution at the moment that is getting any international funding is almost being mandated to have an ISO 20022 native processing capability. I mean, some of the RFPs actually explicitly say all messages passed within the system need to be ISO 20022 compliant to support analysis. So you can't take a message, convert it into something you like, and then convert it back again at the end. So they specifically block the boundary, a boundary problem.
And do they have more specific requirements, like how to do a real-time payment? So ISO is okay, that's the message, but then what exactly the semantics of the flow that send, or you retry if you haven't received response, or you're supposed to retry, or it's a 5-legged transaction like with the SEPA instant, or it's 4-leg, or so any additional specification, or it doesn't matter, just follow one of these things and you are good enough to be evaluated.
Yeah, so yeah, it's fun. That's a great question, because that is the thing which makes me cry. So all of that stuff you and I will recognize as being the important bit around getting a desired behavior out of a system. They don't understand that part so much. And as you know, the ISO 20022, firstly, is actually a standard about managing the change of the messages, right? And it's just horrible that the first thing that became standard was this monstrosity. But so therefore, actually saying it's ISO 20022 compliant is meaningless, as we've said. Each standard's implemented differently. And in fact, ISO 20022 compliant means that you've simply registered and have a dictionary that is published and approved by ISO 20022. So therefore, it is actually meaningless. But what they mean is that it's using those standard messages as we now have in the finance sector for the analysis. But what they don't specify always is are any of the semantics around it. Or any of the important bits are really missing. And in fact, that's what all the people, when they come along and say, we'll implement this using ISO 20022, and then the real hard bit is making sure you use the messages right and you actually work out what the sequence and flow is going to be to get the desired behavior. So
for our purpose, we want to take one of these descriptions, which is available. I hope it's freely available, or we want to work out our own methodologies. So mapping the fields, because I know it's a huge and extremely huge work to take the messages and identify that from the hundreds of fields, this is what I will use for my MSISD, and this is what I'm going to use for whatever other purpose what we need. Or the alternate approach. Obviously, I'm aware of the SEPA instant, but at least that is public. Yeah. And the European Association or European Clearinghouse Association also has plenty of public documents. So that could be a good starting point, because they exactly describe that from this message of ISO PAX 008, this is what field you are using for the currency, for the amount, for the IBAN, for the bank identifier or DFSP ID, and so on and so on. So that could be a much easier exercise for us if we take one of these available documents and approaches.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think what we want to do is do that we want to take one of those public standards and do a comparison against that. Like I said, Michael's done half of, well, or maybe even more than half of the job, because he believes he already has what the message mapping and flows could look like. And and we've gone through this a few times with Miller as well. So we think we have half of it. What I want to do is don't want us to go ahead with just kind of in isolation and come up with our own thing. I want it to be part of that. So like you say, use SEPA or use UK Faster Payments, whatever, that we go with it and use their mappings and our modular loop semantics. And I think that's the sweet spot, isn't it? At least it is to me.
Yeah.
So if we could get that right, and we could do a POC showing that, I think that all of a sudden that means that we as the modular loop community are sitting at that table where we can participate with the World Bank drive to real-time payments, bringing together the goodness of modular loop with the crazy overhead of a message for every purpose, and also obviously this helps with the traveling rules and other things, the other compliance constraints. So Donovan, you asked the question to have the native one versus the cross-network process. Does that make sense now?
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you guys just want to quickly have a look at the board then and see if I've missed anything. If I have, then I can quickly add it. But I think the consensus was that we would first do these POCs using existing messages and then thereafter move on to doing them with like any added recommendations that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a so the POC would let us know what it takes to actually implement this in the real world. We would know the recommendations. We would have a view on which ISO systems to adopt. If there was one, we could just adopt as it is. And there was another point. This is the heart of merge loop white paper. There is I think we do need to spend some effort on this. I can't remember what Adrian called it, but it's basically, we should be able to say in a succinct, documented way, this is why we think those level 1 principles are really important to you, and how they're going to fit into a world that is ISO compliant. So I think there's that is an important artifact, and for us as a community, for us to engage in the wider ecosystem. Because internally as the community, it will help us keep focus, and externally because it helps in the conversation with central banks and other people who we talk to more often than not, to understand the place that merge loop's fulfilling in that solution for them.
Warren, in these next 3 months, we want to have working software, or we target only to get the specifications right? So which one we reuse, which one we not, and we identify that which messages we're going to use, which fields to for a request to pay, and how to map it to a merchant payment with this or cash withdrawal kind of situation. So we do work on specifications, or rather coding?
Do we have enough capacity to do both, where we have where we focus on the P2P as the POC, and we focus on the and because I would like the POC to work into that specification stream. There's a certain amount you can get by analysis, and a certain amount we all know we love studying. We love studying the specifications, but actually when we have to use them, we discover all the stuff we didn't read on the back page. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. No. So I think the validation would be. I would like us to try and commit to doing something meaningful in that space. No.
I'm happy to help.
Great. So
so I mean, like.
So the risk is that it takes too long to decide on any of these things, right? So we have to time box the decision. We've got good candidates, and we've got good things. So we have to have it's not like we'll keep talking about it and keep talking about it for weeks and weeks. The first sprint has to be, we will decide this is the system we're using, and this is the use case we're going on. That's the target for sprint 1. Sprint 2 is, we've got a test environment up and running, so we know which test environment we're running with, and we've done the mapping, and we're going to try.
Now, one question. So this work is going to be done by the OSS core team. So they gonna jump on this and then get another Node.js module which do the transformation, or we do it differently. I mean, especially in JavaScript, the XML parsing and processing, that's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, I remember I suggested we use a JSON version of ISO 20022. There are some mappings available. And I understand some are almost through final approval, but I do believe there are some. Well, I've looked at, I think, 3. But I don't know. I'm not close enough to it to actually decide off the cuff which one to use. But there are definitely ISO 20022 mappings.
For our purpose, the PAX 008 and PAX 002 are the most relevant ones for sure. So that's the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So those are the 2 messages that for a peer-to-peer payment we should deal with. So
yeah, and I suspect there's still a role for paying, but or just paying, but yeah, what I mean is not so much which of the messages, but there are translations. There are libraries out there which says here's a JSON, well, not a library, it's just a definition, right? A schema, JSON schema for ISO that maps between the XML and JSON versions. There's a couple of libraries for that.
So are we only looking at PAX 002 and 008? We're not looking at plain 001 or 002 at all right now. Is that the plan?
No. I don't think we can say that just yet. I think what we want to do is have a look at what that workflow looks like.
All right. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
So when we look at that workflow, we can make that decision.
Yeah.
And in the second sprint, that's what I'm saying, is we would be looking at making those implementation decisions. Which messages we're using.
All right. Sounds good.
And what the mapping is for them.
Just a quick add-on to this one, that the bit of discussion with Miller was that we more looking for the PAX one, so not the payment initiation, but the clearing and settlement type of message. What the schema. Okay, so at least I'm not aware that they do have a JSON representation already defined and it's standardized, or we should go for the XML one, which has the proper schema definitions and with the necessary complexity with that one. We need to do the mapping ourselves as part of this POC, or we do use some JSON messages for these ones, which I don't know at least that they are available or not, and we go with that.
Yeah, I could actually get hold of messages for PAX and paying formats if you want, because we're working on that. Most of the banks now they use both intermittently.
The bank internally is using PAIN because that's what the channels are saying, that I want to initiate payment. And between the schema and the bank, that's the space that you are using PAX. I mean, okay, my experience and the specifications that I know of, they follow this pattern. So PAIN for the internal bank, payment initiate, and then PAX for the schema and the payment switch in the center, like module loop. That is the scenario, or could be a scenario. And back to the other question. So who will do this work? So it's inside the module loop core. And should it be the OSS team, or it's a whole different discussion that actually who's going to work on this POC?
Yeah, so I think we're going to have to get. I'm hoping we will get all of us working on it into one form or another. So I think Motorsbox is going to add some more people to this initiative. Hopefully, you know, we can keep collaborating on within the wider community. We do hope that the core team will have enough capacity to support us, but that's only going to be true if the core team gets more capacity. Because they're a bit stretched with everything at the moment. So
probably we need to notify them that don't stretch too much on themselves, because then we have another set of work for them. So in the other work streams that we...
Yeah. Well, I mean, does DPC and so I mean, we can agree on the what is reasonable, and then we can agree on we can put out our lending caps to everyone and ask who can donate some time, because, you know, DPC and MIFOS and Coil and everyone, I mean, you might all be able to contribute a little bit, and that might be enough to get us moving along. I mean, we're starting to work in a far more collaborative way, like the PISP work and that. So we need more of that, really, to be strong.
Yeah, like we can definitely help out on the cross network one, because I mean, like, it leverages a lot of the work that we did for the 85, 83 stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can also help with the 222 one, since we have done a mapping with OpenAPI as well.
Okay, so great.
We could also have something, if you remember that I demonstrated in the first session, then I joined the community, that we have a simulator and all of this for the SEPA instant type of messages. So that has all the parsing, the message formats, it's all in Java, not JavaScript, but in Java, to parse those messages and then pass it on. And now we have the module loop interface, so that could also help to connect the two systems together.
Okay, good. So you see, there's a lot of capability around the table. So, but Isfan, you made so your point is, for the native support, should we do it using XML messages to start with? And so I simultaneously hate the idea and think, of course we should, because what we said is we want to be 100%, we want to impedance match with the rest of the ecosystem. If they're doing that now, then we should do that now too. And it also means we don't have to think very hard about it.
Yeah.
We could submit and process the message and do it in a very set way. So a very large bank recently integrated with has actually done, you will all love this, because what they've done is they've said, we have a RESTful interface. All that you do is you pass in this XML document, which will then do batch processing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Lovely.
We've got into that similar scenario as well, Warren.
Exactly. It's so sad, right? And I feel we might be just suggesting the same. So I'm a little nervous about doing that, but on the other hand, it might be appropriate for the POC.
Yeah, because XML is what we see a lot being used as well, like Swan mentioned.
Yeah.
Most of these guys are using XMLs.
Yeah. Okay, so our vote, would be, say, based on our experience of everybody around the table, actually what we should do is just have process it in the native XML directly for the POC, and then that also means we have more time to understand and define JSON version. And one of the questions we could then answer is, if we submit this to the ISO panel, we can actually say, here is an XML and a JSON version of any messages we do, and help drive that conversation forward.
In a technical point
of view, real-time payment.
In a technical point of view, so the modular loop hub is like running in a Kubernetes cluster. So adding one more pod to do this transformation. So provide the endpoints, receiving the XML message, and then sending it in the native format what we have inside modular loop hub. That could be potentially a way to approach this.
Yeah, providing we maintain. Yeah, there are a few things. So because of the way the JWS signing works, and we want to suggest that we have that at the end anyway, you would have to make sure that the message, the original message, was transportable through the system in the correct form. So, so in other words, we just look down, we extract the data we need from it, we process that and move it along. And and because the original message cannot be modified during the process, we just pass that message out. Yeah.
Look, we need to modify, because so you receive a PAX 008, and whatever you're sending out, you need to have new timestamp in it, and a couple of other fields to be modified. So you could attach the original one, that's okay, but the switch is definitely modifying those messages.
I mean, maybe mapping exercise, right? So we'll have to do a mapping exercise, right? That one-to-one.
Sorry, Ranjit, come closer to the microphone, please.
No, I was saying we would probably will have to do that mapping exercise in order to do that one-to-one mapping of each messages between the two systems, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I understand correctly that we need this ISO message on the incoming side, but whenever we communicate with the other bank, we also need to go back to XML and then communicate with them with the ISO message.
Yeah, I'm suggesting that if we maintain the modular loop semantics, we would make sure we had the sign message be and that signature being trusted by each DFSP, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that would mean that the sign message would have to be transmitted through the system. If there was any other supplementary data that was mandated, we would have an interesting challenge on how to do that. I'm not sure though that I'm not sure that we have to. And I think if we do, it's based on the scheme rules. So again, it's I'm not close enough to it. It's been a long time since I've looked at
I do remember that I was doing some of this implementation, and what you do, then you create the outgoing message that you start mapping things. So you take something from the input, then you change a timestamp, you change a transaction ID and things like that. So like, I don't know, probably 80% of the fields what you take, even keeping the structure in some cases. But then you also start modifying and adding a couple of 20% of the things in the outgoing message. And then you receive the response, and then it becomes probably even more trickier, because then you do the clearing and settlement part, and then you have additional information to the message that you want.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think these are good details to discuss. Yep. I think there's some ways around them though. So I don't want to, but the only way to know is to go and do it.
Yeah.
Or at least to do that analysis. So
probably another interesting aspect of how we want to do the digital signature of these messages. So which standard to follow in the message, outside of the message, or which technology we want to use for that, for these XML ones. So the XML digital signatures or something else.
Yeah.
But that's a crucial part of the decision, I would say, because the logic and the code is different depending on how we want to sign the messages.
So I think
I think I would caution against like diving too deep into the details, but like just sort of bringing that up a few levels higher and sort of saying, are we fine with putting security patterns into the scope of the POCs?
Yes, because that is at the heart of what that is stuff when you talk about the heart of modular.
Yeah, that's a non-repudiated part. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's two parts to that, right? So like the one is the non-repudiation stuff, and then also like the message signing.
So there's
the condition for full versus so I was saying like the condition and for full, and then afterwards like the message signing of that.
Yeah.
So like for the POCs, we could say like if that's the heart of module loop, then the POCs will have the condition and for fulls, and then we can sign the messages. We'll say that it's outside of the scope of the POC.
No, I think it needs to have both of those things for non-repeatability. And I think I take your point, Ishvan, that we might look at different solutions, but I think we should keep things more the same than different. And there's no reason why if we're doing this horrible thing of passing an XML message into that we couldn't apply the JWS algorithm to it, because it doesn't matter that it's the way it actually is, that it's JWS or not, right? So if we just look at our activities here, because I'm sure we're about to run out of time any minute now. So we've got the native things. We've got POC recommending adhere to modular principles. What mechanisms are needed, new messages, what policy level changes are needed. Okay. So how would we flesh this out over time? I did given what I thought would be the timeline for it. So in that first PI, we're going to agree the scope of use cases. We're going to agree which things we're going to do. In the second sprint, we're going to, and we actually have the two streams here, don't we? I'm trying to just move them. So if we do this, we might have, are you guys watching on the board?
Yeah.
Select JSON form or use XML. Okay, that's actually a decision we just need to make there, right? Currently, we're saying we saying actually. I think we're saying we prefer to just use the XML for this, right? Message mapping, define flows, security patterns. Actually, define flows, security patterns, identify scheme rules for particular. We've got that twice. Scheme rules for this one we can use, yeah. And most probably we need to do that after we've actually evolved it a little bit further. Yeah. What new messages are needed? What policies? Yeah, we actually need to make sure we actually have some time to implement end-to-end. End-to-end demo. So this point, yeah, we're trying to get that end-to-end demo for a particular thing. And yeah, we're trying to get a, this is the cross-network.
For the end-to-end demo, the simulator. So we need to extend also the simulator who could send these new messages in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I might be able to help also here. So that's another discussion. But if it's ISO 222, then we could also send in messages with the existing simulator.
Yeah, I mean, that would be ideal, really. Is that if we could take your existing ISO 222 simulator, your SEPA one, for instance, and we'd send in a message and say, hey, it worked or didn't work, or it worked and this is what we had to change to support the flow, then we have a very powerful, gap analysis, right?
Yeah, true. The only question that we go for the SEPA 5-legged one or the fast 4-legged transaction style. And then, we just need to agree on this one. And then obviously if it requires modification, then fine, then it requires modification.
So, so does this make sense to lay it out something like this? We're gonna do the comparison. We're gonna make the decisions around simulators, and we will
add to the Singaporean fast to this comparison, please, because that's what Miller was also suggesting, that we need to take a serious look on that one.
The fast.
Fast or faster? I never know, but I mean I will Google it up. So, but it's the Singaporean solution.
Sorry, single. Yeah, Google it up and then let us know.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's just see how much time we got here.
Just simply fast with all capitals, fast and secure transfers.
Fast and secure transfers, okay.
Yeah, FAST, yeah, capitals.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to suggest that we're going to choose one of these.
Yep.
Define flows, include the security patterns. At this point here, we should also have sample messages. Yeah.
Yep.
Those should all be. So at this point, we'll have the sequence diagrams, and at this point, we'll have all the messages. And as you know, we usually end up making them at the same time, don't we? So
yeah.
But we should have it all, yeah, so we know what we're coding against, and we know what the tests are going to be like. Okay. I don't want to say we'll have our test ready to run, because the Miller will say don't do test-driven development. So, but we will have a template against which we're working.
What? Miller doesn't like test-driven development?
Yeah. In my experience, any methodology followed too fanatically can be bad.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, a dogmatic approach is not always best. Okay, so we want to do this, and we want to work towards getting this demo in place here. So what I'm saying is we will try and say at a high level, what we did. So by this mid-PI review, we are able to say, listen, this thing's a flyer or not, right? Do we understand it? What do we think the risks are? How are we going to see how this works? And what's going to go pear-shaped as we go forward? So understanding the implications effectively of what's going to happen. We want to get to this cross demo, and we'll have just I think maybe we need to be realistic and say that we will take some time to get there. So if we, by the end of PI5, have the end-to-end demos in place, right? So what are we going to do in that time? We're going to have merge loop ISO adapter. It's an adapter with an O on E. And we're going to have internal message passing and processing. Actually, I mean, this is the thing we've got to work out, right? If it's signed, how does that work? We'll have figured it out in our security patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we'll need to have done those. We'll need to have implemented the parsing and the passing of messages. Simulator modifications and extensions, and internal processing. Yeah. All right, now on the cross-network stream, what are the items? You might already have this documented in another stream, that's why I haven't put anything else here, but you guys have some other topics here. Randy, Max, I'm just, oh. I don't know when you want to add them in.
So I think at the moment, because we're going to be like leveraging the 8583 adapter, so a lot of the work is just the message mapping and defining the flows. So then so where your cursor is now and the following sprint would just be actually implementing, or as you say, repurposing the adapter.
Okay, so that's that, and simulators and testing environments.
So yeah, they okay. Yeah, that's actually very good. So I think
you would need to have a
working with TCI. Yeah, I'm not sure. So we'll have to see. Like, there is some sort of like test environment, I think, arranges for TCIP side. If not, then we'll have to.
TCIP has got a test environment. We actually have.
Sorry, that's TCIP, yeah.
TCIB.
TCIB, yeah.
Yeah, transaction created on an instant basis. Thanks, sirs.
We could use the MyFOS lab environment also for this testing.
Excellent.
Okay, yeah. So then, yeah, that one or the MyFOS one.
Okay, so that's how you're going to get the testing environment up. And okay, and you guys have always had nice, sexy demos showing something at the end. So, what do we? How do we make sure that all of this ISO work gets shown off to its best?
We can do a simulation like last time through, but if it's going to be online, you'll have to live with simulators, and then using the traces, we can actually display how the transaction is converted to different protocols. It's really not going to be as funky as you do.
Well, I mean, actually, I mean, because this is a POC around the unsexy, if you will, of showing we can do the messages. Maybe it's sufficient that we just have it be something that you know is a message layer, is a
we can create something like
Postman message testing. The simulators, if we can show on the different simulators, depending how we do it, I don't think it'll be a problem to add the adapter to the current merge loop simulator, because we'll use the same components on both sides, so it makes it easy. But yeah, so we just need to think about how to what I'm going to put here is demo visualization.
Yeah, we can do some. Don actually had a pretty cool demo this time for his web payment, so we can come up with something like that, Don. I'm sure you'll have some funky.
In our case, in our simulator, we dump all these messages to an Elasticsearch, and you could see some nice charts, and then the total money flowing through, and the XML messages themselves. So
that's very good, actually. Yeah, that's quite nice.
Yeah. So I think we got some good options there, but just in terms of planning, we want to make people aware that, hey, this is what you'll have to do. Otherwise, sometimes we forget. Okay, so our end of game is we will have tried to answer a POC to investigate what it would take. Do we answer the do we need to additional messages?
Probably we could highlight the quotation, that we need to figure out that how do we want to implement the quotation using the ISO messages. That's going to be tricky, probably, to find what is the best match for this.
Agreement quotation. For agreement.
And discovery.
Yeah, you are right. So there was no standardized messages as far as I remember.
/ party and quote. Yeah.
Yeah.
And let me just see. Goodness, where is it? Real time. Okay, so the guys we care about. Here. So there's the it's this group. ISO. Just probably need to do that first. Cross network. We'll have answered both of these things. What would it take, and impact to scheme. Cross network for the one, and so I'm just trying to make sure this summarizes things. Native.
Hey guys, sorry to interrupt, but I did want to let you know the main session room is starting back up.
Okay. All right. What are the risks? Any risk you want to put down here immediately?
resource.
Besides resources.
Yeah, that's probably the main thing, that we all happy to have this idea. Just
yeah, resourcing. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone. Looking forward to working with you guys and making this happen.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you, John. Next, Tom.
Thanks, Warren. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
You may also be eligible for additional benefits with a Medicare Advantage plan that includes